Hello, my name is Esteban. I'm going to give an introduction. I am a minor in resiliency and sustainability in engineering systems. It's a very long minor title, but it's really important when considering why I went to New Zealand at all. So this minor is centered around the idea of resiliency, which means the ability of a community to recover after an acute or chronic hazard or disaster. And that was important while considering Maori buildings, especially considering that it's on a seismic fault. And so that's going to be kind of the center of my discussion here. So a little story about this picture. I was chosen to be the chief of our group. The way you're introduced into a marae, there's a ceremony which involves a warrior coming up to you, doing a very intimidating dance, holding a weapon, sticking his tongue out at you, and you just have to stand there and keep eye contact the whole time. So they selected me for some reason. I don't know why. Maybe because I'm the tallest. And so I was the chief for the whole procession, and you'll see throughout the slide what happened. So I am trying to get into research, and I guess my research goals outlined simply as I would like to understand what are the actual social effects of a modern zoned city on our mental health. I think it's something that can be mapped and researched robustly in a way that can affect our design decisions. So this is me proceeding towards the Marae. It's actually a pretty amazing experience. Even though this is kind of a ceremonial, almost a tourist attraction, it really is something that this institution, they're trying to preserve Maori culture. And so it felt authentic to me, and I think everybody who was involved was very excited to be a part of it, especially the performers. Um, so the purpose of this project was to look at how recent building legislation um, surrounding what's the name? Seismic events, like regulating buildings which are at seismic risk, how that has affected Maori culture. So a lot of these policies are made using Western-based design decisions and are used making a certain scientific method which may not be compatible with Maori worldview, which is fundamentally different from ours, and that's an important consideration to have. Um, so some of those research topics which I was looking at were how do the Maori relate to the real environment? And then I found this through literature reviews and interviews with community members. Um, and then obviously we're looking through those interviews also how that legislation would affect the Maori. Um, and then I wanted to look at a larger picture just to tie it to my overall research goals. What is the effect of urban flight and suburban sprawl on the Maori occupants and their community buildings? So this is a hongi. This is a formal greeting where you shake the hand and look them straight in the eye and touch noses. That's how you say hi. Um, and that was part of my honors as being the chief of our group. So for the methods, as I mentioned before, literature review, interviews, site visits to 3 different marae. The original intention was to go to, I think, 7 in 3 different regions, but one of the issues with this kind of research with indigenous cultures, it's not really an issue, but it's just a precautionary thing you have to do, is you have to make sure that both parties are on the same terms. So that kind of hampered the speed a little bit, and we came at the beginning of the project, so we tried our best to get as much done as possible. So the places I did get to go to, it was pretty amazing, and I'm definitely lucky to actually get to see these community members, and we did that same ceremonial entrance every single time we met with a community member. So that was pretty amazing. And then lastly, we wanted to create an ecological model, which in Western terms, there's a social ecological model which we can look at, but they've actually come up with their own, which is called the Mauri model. And it has to do with, the thing that makes it different is it's considering the preservation of cultural values, which is really important for Maori people. And they've actually been able to maintain their cultural values in the face of changing economic and social pressures because of the fact that they pride their culture. So just some definitions. I gave you the definition of resilience earlier. And Professor Kevin Walsh would be happy to talk to you about it. I'm taking the class right now. I just want to reintroduce the definition of sustainability because it's really relevant to Maori culture. They just have a different name for it. And as I mentioned before, the Maori model. Here are some Maori definitions of words. A big part of this research was learning their language, which is in use. And so that was actually a very interesting opportunity. So one thing I'd mentioned before is sustainability. There is an equivalent in Maori culture, and it's called Kaitikitanga. Means the guardianship for future generational use. And that's kind of at the center of all their design-based decisions for the built environment and for any other aspect of their culture. And so that's pretty amazing, actually, that it's just kind of inherently as a part of their belief system. So this was before I went to Rome, so the drawing is bad. So I just want to kind of give a little bit of a introduction to what a marae looks like. So I've been talking about these community buildings. I wish I had a pointer, but I guess you can see the. It's hard to say.
The mouse.
Is there a pointer?
No.
Oh, this guy. Okay. So this is supposed to represent the foreground before the main building. This is the Whare Nui, it's the big house. And then next to it, you'll have the Whare Kai, which means the dining house. And then you'll have the Whare Paku, which are the toilets, which are very important, actually. And they're considered a critical part of the marae. And then often you'll have accessory buildings. Like right here, you'll have a place where the tribe will sit while you're actually entering in that ceremonial procession. And then sometimes you may have a school associated with it or other important community buildings. So another important term is hui, which means the formal meeting that I had mentioned before, and it's what I was the chief of for our group. So I just wanted to talk about, this is one of the sites we visited. It was in Taharua. It was 40 kilometers outside of Auckland. And it's really interesting because, as you see, there's only this building, and there isn't that complex developed around it. But it was something that was used by the community. And it really is a humble building, but you can see that on the inside. It's actually pretty beautiful. The fact that they have that kind of ornate ornamentation and painting is something that is throughout all of Maori culture. It changes depending on where you are in the geolocation. In some places they have carved wood, and in some places it's actually pretty simple, and they'll just have tuku panels, which are just woven mats that line the inside. So this was just us meeting with the community members, and this guy, Peter, with the big rubber boots, he was amazing. And it's interesting to meet these people who obviously care a lot about their property, and they really want help, and they need help. And we're only college students, but you can look them in the eye and be like, okay, I'm gonna try my best here. So I'm gonna kind of speed through this because of the boring part of my presentation, but the Maori model is that ecological social model I was mentioning before, and it just is how you map at different levels and different scales. What are the different factors affecting these communities, or whatever you're trying to evaluate? So in this case, it's the marae, and we're trying to understand what are those factors which are preventing the development of that marae. So this was before they actually started the renovation, and you can see it's like actually amazing. It's beautiful, really. But so I just want to talk about my findings. I kind of introduced my research topics at the beginning, but those findings kind of I would find them along my path in New Zealand. That marae represents a living tradition of architecture. That really what the community members had outlined was it's not that kind of romanticized image of a marae that was important to them. It's just the fact that they're able to use and invest into it continuously. And then next, it's just that it's a bastion for Maori culture, and it has been for hundreds of years. And the building legislation is insensitive to it, and it is discriminating against them in a way because it does not consider the level of service which is needed to have these marae. You can see that the Pairo marae was actually pretty rural. And that is the case for a lot of marae. And they don't need a fully paved road to get to that marae. They just need a gravel path. And that's like something that may seem simple, but the legislation is completely preventing them from continuing to develop their community through these buildings. So that's it. This is my conclusions, kind of how I tied it into Notre Dame. I think you guys may know all of those reasons. You probably heard them before from our professors. These are my many acknowledgments, and that's it. Any questions?
So I also had Kevin Walsh as a professor, as did Bree, and he's the man. But I'm just curious how you got involved in this to begin with, and kind of was was the research that you did something that, you kind of were like, this is what I want to look into, or was it set up by a professor, or how did that all work?
Well, Kevin set up all of the New Zealand program. So it was great because he kind of facilitated for sophomores to find this kind of research. And he had outlined 5 different projects, and I applied to this one because it had to do with indigenous built environment. And he had approached me and said, like, look, we need architects, like engineers just don't think this way. And we need to learn how to think about things that are not just the physical built environment, that there are other things that affect our environment. So that was it worked out really nicely, honestly. Like I just stumbled upon it. So, yeah.
Want to catch?
So based on what you found and your findings from this research project, what do you think some future topics or future research questions that you've sort of inspired you from this project that could pave the way for a future project for you or someone else that wants to look into this kind of problem?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, a big part of this project was learning how to research in a robust manner social factors. It seems like maybe kind of a cloudy statement, but there are ways you can measure and metrics you can use. And I think using that ecological model I'd mentioned is a way that researchers have found to kind of put into stone what we know to be true, just we can't based on intuition explain. So there's a lot to do with that kind of model, and maybe look into it more. And then also, I mean, a big part of this has to do with building legislation and zoning, and that's a problem in our country too. That zoning does negatively affect. In some cases, it was meant to help us, but it has unintended consequences which we need to explore. So those are kind of the 2 different outlets maybe you can go into, but there's plenty, honestly.
I think the sketch you showed with the concentric circles
Mm-hmm.
is kind of very interesting because you talk about the approach towards, something that we typically look at in design is, being economically viable,
Mm-hmm.
and we leave it there. We stop there. And the 3 other circles that you talk about are so important for actually a building, an urban, and a placement of a culture to actually exist and survive long term.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't consider those at all as a part of the factors of our working. So when we talk about in this school we talk about architecture and urban design. I think we need to talk about all those factors as a part of our design solutions and not just limiting them with one or the other aspect. So
Absolutely.
that's clearly a very good, learning that we get from it. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Esteban.
Thank you.